And I want to thank you all again for joining us for Zoom into Archaeology. My name is Nicole Grenan. I'm a public archaeologist with the Florida Public Archaeology Network. My office is located in Pensacola, Florida, in the US. And I'm so thrilled today to welcome back Mal Fenn. They did a fantastic scientific illustration workshop for us earlier this year. I think we had almost 300 people sign up, and I think like 5 continents were represented. And since then, we've expanded the amount of people that we can get into a Zoom room now because of that one program. So I'm so excited to offer it again, and want to thank Mal so much for joining us today. And I'm going to go ahead and let them take it away.
Hey, thank you all so much for having me. So I am our public archaeologist in our Southeast region. My office is in Davie, Florida. And today we'll be talking about scientific illustration and how it applies to archaeology and why something that seems kind of outdated is a really useful skill to have. So I guess to get started, I've been an illustrator for much longer than I've been an archaeologist. I've been an illustrator for like 10 or 11 years at this point, and an archaeologist for 8 or 9 years. And I got into archaeology by way of science illustration. Basically, I was on a school trip in college before camera phones were really a thing, and my friend had let me borrow a digital camera to take pictures of all of the different artifacts and museum stuff I saw. And it was terrible and it died immediately. But luckily I waited, so I just started drawing everything. And my professor, she was really happy with the amount of realism I could get, and I started getting illustration from there. And so that's how having a portfolio of has helped me get lots of projects as an archaeologist, and I've been able to especially apply it to public education about archaeology. So I'm going to try to keep my blabbing to 20 minutes starting now, and then we'll do as much time as we have for free drawing, which may be another like 20-25 minutes. And then the last 10 minutes of the we have can be a Q&A. So let's get going. So first of all, the Florida Public Archaeology Network, or FPAN, aims to promote and facilitate the conservation, study, and public understanding of Florida's archaeological heritage. We've got 8 regions all throughout the state. We aim to assist the Florida State Division of Historical Resources, local governments, and do education outreach. And this looks like doing all kinds of different things, from sitting in on historic preservation meetings to wrangling a bunch of preschoolers and trying to teach them that archaeology and paleontology are different. So what is science illustration? It's very tautological, but the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators defines it as art in the service of science. It is a scientifically informed observation, that intends to accurately portray a subject. So today we're going to be talking about scale illustration mostly, and we'll be going into that in a little more detail later on. There's a lot of debate about exactly how old scientific illustration is, at least in my mind. Many archaeologists think that one of the oldest, anatomical illustrations that we know of comes from El Pindal cave in Spain. This drawing of a mammoth, which might be a diagram of, where its heart is, an anatomical diagram in order to, let hunters spear it much easier, is thought to date to between 22,000 years ago and 17,000 years ago. And this kinds of illustration has been going on all over the planet for a very, very, very long time because there are a ton of uses for it. In terms of medical illustration, one of the big stars there was Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who was operating mostly in like the very late 18th, early 20th century. He was a neurologist and an illustrator. And a lot of his work is still very relevant for the medical field today, and also just really cool looking. Two of the two very influential botanical illustrators are Ben Kao Jing from 4800 possibly BCE to somewhere between that and 250 AD, and Ernst Haeckel, who lived from 1834 to 1919. And Ernst Haeckel did, much more than botanical illustrations. He also did just, general science illustration, but he's kind of best known for a lot of his botanical work, and it's very pretty. When it comes to paleontological illustration, this is fun to talk about, but not quite what we are focusing on today. That said, I do want to recommend All Yesterdays because it is a really, really great example of all the possibilities of speculative paleo art. Just like with archaeological illustration, paleontological illustration has, straight up drawings of artifacts, or in their case, ecofacts. And then there's speculative illustration. So that's when you're, recreating paleo environments. And both of these are also relevant to archaeology. So if you're into paleontology at all, I really recommend checking out All Yesterdays and All Your Yesterdays, which is all speculative paleo art when it comes to dinosaurs. So now getting to artifact illustration. There's also two basic types. We also have speculative art about the past, and we also have artifact illustration and or mapping. They use very much the same kinds of skills, but on different scales. Both these pieces are by Catherine Kalaki, one of my favorite illustrators out there. And she was the sort of main illustrator for the dig at Çatalhöyük in Turkey, until that dig shut down in the last couple of years. So she's done these great representations of what life in Çatalhöyük may have been like. And then she's also drawn a bunch of, very intense hyperrealism images of artifacts from different angles. And we're gonna be kind of doing that today with random household objects. My random household object for today is my alligator-shaped stress ball from Billy's Swamp Safari. If you're in Florida, you should go visit Billy's Swamp Safari on the Seminole Reservation. So in 2021, why do scientists need artists? With 3D scanning and 3D printing, and especially with laser scanning, why do we still need a human hand and a human eye? The answer is just being able to make choices about interpretation. And also, it's often a question of thing is cost effective. A lot of projects still can't quite afford 3D scanners or 3D printers, although the technology is getting cheaper and cheaper, and maybe one day I'll be out of the job, but that day is not this day. And so these skills continue to be very useful to me, at least, and I've heard to other people. So in terms of interpretation, sometimes it can be very difficult, for a computer to tell what is natural wear on an artifact and what is human use wear. Those are things that come, only with experience, and that archaeologists are always arguing over, that we're always getting new data about. I like to bring up Carol Abraxinkas of the University of Chicago. She doesn't work with archaeology, she works with more of the paleontological side. But she, if I remember correctly, has actually, either her or one of her students actually discovered a, new type of ancient barnacle fossil or something, because they were able to, they took their artist's eye, they applied it to science, and they noticed a very minute difference in the morphology of, different animal species from the deep past. And so, it's very useful to take that artist's eye and apply it to science. It's very useful to have these two fields inform each other. And then also, this isn't relevant outside the Americas, but it's also important for NAGPRA compliance. In many parts of the states, Indigenous people prefer, it's not part of their lifeways to take photographs of human remains. And so when it comes to filling out reports and presenting at conferences, if we'll be talking about human remains, a lot of the times that means, especially in terms of pre-contact human remains, that means we need a drawing. And there are actually ways to kind of squeak around that if you don't have quite a lot of art skills that I can definitely answer questions about later. But yeah, I know we've got an international crowd in here, so it doesn't apply to everybody. And in the future of science illustration, it's kind of already here. We're seeing these really incredible strides in, speculative art about what the past was like. Time Looper is a really, really fabulous app, an AR app that you can get for usually free that lets you kind of walk around all of these, sites with different actors even. With lots of live movement. There are all these new ways of interpreting the past. And if you have these basic skills of scaled illustration and realism, and at least drawing up and rendering artifacts, 3D artifacts in a 2D space, it's just a very good foundation to have as we move into the future. And you don't have to be an illustrator. It's not a necessary part of being an archaeologist or any other kind of scientist. I just like to always make a note that it's good to have specialized skills in any field. If you find any niche, you can really, really use it to your advantage. And you can really contribute a lot to science and the accumulation of knowledge that way. For me, I'm not an illustrator as an entire career. It's just kind of one part of my toolkit. If you want to be an illustrator as a career, look into medical illustration, perhaps. So the difference between science illustration and fine art is that fine art can be photorealistic, but that doesn't mean it's scientific illustration. On the right, we have a piece of photorealistic art, and on the left, we have science illustration. They're both, steeped in realism, but the illustration is meant to educate. In our case, it has to have a scale bar. It has to be kind of true to size to a certain degree. It has to be focused on accuracy. There's not a lot of room for artistic interpretation, at least depending on, what kind of information you're trying to put in that illustration. One of the main differences between fine art and science illustration is that we really have to pay attention to working on a grid if we want to keep things to scale. And for that, I have my piece of graph paper. I will be working in metric today. Apologies to American folks who are in here. We send out some graph paper to print out. But if you want to follow along in inches, that's also okay. Just know that for the most part, we really have metric when we're working in science. So I'd like to tell you, whenever looking at an overall archaeological site, start to kind of in Tron. If anyone's familiar with Tron, it's a movie from the 80s, and they also remade it in like the 2010s about a dude who gets transported into a game and everything is on a grid. And that's exactly how we have to think of an archaeological site if we want to be able to, and also artifacts, if we want to be able to put this information down on a paper in a 2D space and be able to share it with other scientists and the public accurately. So, when you look out on an archaeological site, when you look on this precious gator-shaped stress ball, you got to think of it as, where does this lie on a grid? So artifact illustrations and larger maps of archaeological sites use the exact same techniques, mostly just on different scales. Very, very similar to each other. When you are mapping an archaeological site, you have to sit down, you have to figure out how large the whole space is. You have to write your scale bar on the side. Note that they both have scale bars. You have to decide how much space on the paper you're going to take up. And you have to kind of like start to build a box for yourself. I am not a math person at all. I'm very much a artsy side of archaeology type of person. And so I always make things really, really easy for myself as much as possible by just taking really simple measurements to start with and building a box for myself. And we'll start to do that once I get to this part. But I wanted to kind of prime you guys for it. One of the main differences between artifact illustrations and larger maps is that the maps require a north arrow and also often a key, but these are both, scale drawings. And they kind of both end up requiring really similar skills. Like if you're the designated mapper, you'll also end up being the designated illustrator for everything. So what we're essentially doing with our household object is that we are turning ourselves into low-tech 360 scanners, 3D scanners, and we are creating a low-tech point cloud. So like we'll want to be measuring how, ooh, I hate when this happens. Okay, we'll want to be measuring how long our object is, how wide it is, if there are any contours that are really important to showing the shape of the object. We'll want to take a few measurements along those lines, but for now, we can just take those like 4 measurements of the largest, measures of what an object is. So the main goal of artifact illustration is to support the research question that the archaeologist or other scientists you're working with is trying to argue. Like if we are looking at this very, very cute Billy Swamp Safari alligator-shaped stress ball, we have to be able to argue in the site report at the end of the excavation what this is and where it came from. So we have to use lighting to we have to use lighting and thinking strategically about the angles we're working from to accurately represent the object that we're drawing. And sometimes that means drawing it from different angles so that we can see things very clearly. And sometimes that means using a particular type of lighting there. Typically we want to use hard lighting for an artifact. Soft lighting is more ambient light, like sunlight, or light that has some kind of like veil between that and you. It's the type of lighting they use in like romantic comedies to like keep actresses' faces very soft because women aren't allowed to age on film or anything like that or have any easily recognizable flaws. And that's what soft lighting is for. Soft lighting obscures details and just makes everything really pretty and cute, whereas it comes from a light source that is usually larger than your object and usually fairly far away. Whereas hard lighting is a light source that is usually smaller than your object and comes from a much closer distance. So we can see quite a bit of detail on all of the little foamy back scoots on my little alligator shaped stress ball because I've got it under hard lighting right now. And I've got a small, you can't quite see it, but I've got a small lamp up here that's very, very bright. And that's what's allowing me to get lots of details. And especially if you're working in a museum or on a site and you don't always have access to these objects, it's good to take a reference photo to work from. And so one great hard light source is, your phone. It's a small light source, it's very close to you. And I'm gonna kind of like move it around my face so that you can see how much it changes all my features. Just moving the light source around. So let me see. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so you can see how great those details come out when we've got a hard light source on a small object. And this is a goofy little cartoon guy right now, but when it comes to an actual artifact on an actual site, this is pretty important because these small details are what makes the difference between, different species of animals that have been fossilized, between different kinds of artifacts, between regular use and, human useware. So artifact illustration requires an intense eye for detail, as well as, accuracy in scale more than anything else. So optics and optical illusion is your friend when it comes to science illustration, because we are wanting to fake as much as we can, and it doesn't have to be perfect this time, we're just trying it out, but we want to fake as much as we can a 3D object in a 2D space. How do we do that? We use all kinds of, I apologize if anyone speaks French here, I barely can, all kinds of trompe l'oeil techniques to fool the eye into thinking that things aren't actually what they are, which is scritches on, graphite or pencil scritches on a paper. If we are drawing, say, a clay figurine, and this is like a little 3D printout of one, then one of the tricks that we can use is pareidolia, the human brain creating order and familiarity where there is none. So I'm not sure if we can see this very well, but this is a wee little 3D printed artifact from, I believe, Montpellier. Just a small little doll. And if you can see the hint of a human face there, that is pareidolia at work. And we can create that same hint of a human face just with, the right kinds of lines and the right kinds of dots. If we end up using stippling, which is using many, many small dots to create the illusion of high contrast and volume. Forced perspective is also really important for us to think about. This makes an object appear to be closer, farther away, or larger than it actually is by skewing size and angles. Disneyland, the Imagineers used forced perspective. They make the facades, of all these buildings going up to Cinderella's castle much, 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 much smaller as you get closer to make the castle appear more larger and imposing. In Indigenous art, one great example we have right from Florida is the Fort Center site that had a bunch of these gargoyle carved figurines that were placed over what we think may have been some kind of burial pit in a pond. They were all, it's hard to tell from this picture, unfortunately, of this eagle, but they're very, very wide at the top and very large. And they're all on these, their legs are all very long, almost like all these animals are on stilts. And so that kind of leads us to believe that these were meant to be looking down imposingly on anyone who went onto this platform in Fort Center. And in Western art, we started to see perspective or forced perspective used by Giotto in the 1300s, like right at the very beginning of the Renaissance. If you compare, before Giotto and after Giotto in Western art, it's insane the amount of change there was in just a century. So this is a diagram that I like a lot. This is how we decide what to measure on an artifact. So, once again, we want to get those widest and longest points, and then anything that we can use to identify an artifact, we really want to highlight and we want to get a lot of measurements of. Like, for example, on this, it looks like a nail of some kind in the upper right hand corner here. This is actually really, really important because in the States, one of the rules of thumb of being able to tell a historic nail from a modern machine cut nail is that typically the historic nails are rectangular or square shaped at the head, while the modern nails are circular. So that's a detail that we really, really want. So you can kind of see like how the artist here is measuring the space between the sort of head of the nail and the stalk of the nail, this little scooch right here, and the top of this dome, and trying to put these things together. And doing the same thing with this spear, doing the same thing with this sort of chain link here as well. So if your, object is a round object, you definitely want to pay attention to, however many measurements you need to make to create this circular shape. Basically, we're doing geometry. We're going to be taking, and we are going to be plotting different points of them on a graph. And then we're pretty much going to be connecting the dots and making it look cute. And therein lies the scientific illustration. Oh, well, there's my hard and soft light. It got order. But yeah, here is how we talk about hard and soft light. Hard light is movies for action. Hard light is for action movies where you want everyone to look wrinkly and intense and like they've seen many atrocities, and soft light is for rom-coms where no one's allowed to have any flaws. Anyway, so to create these kinds of lighting and to highlight all these details, we want to think about how to do shading. And there are a lot of different options there. You can use hatching, which is just lines, just horizontal or vertical lines that are very sketchy that you kind of put together. And like it says here on the left-hand side, you can use it to suggest a shape. You can curve those hatched lines to represent shadow and to kind of fake that sense of space. You can also use cross-hatching if you want differing layers of contrast. When it comes to colors, when it comes to materials, there are no hard and fast rules in artifact illustration unless we're talking about lithics, in which there are very, very strict rules because you have to be able to capture the angle at which all of your stone has been flaked off. That gets to be a little more complicated, so we're not going to address that today. We're simply going to pretend it's not there. We're not going to pretend it's not there, but you know, what I typically like to do and what I've done in most of my career is using stippling, which is just putting a bunch of dots together. And that's what gives you a sense of space here. So you can create a ton of really intense contrast changes with stippling if you put your dots really close together. You can create a gentle transition from like a medium to a light source. If you put them farther away, you can, just the same way as with hatching and cross hatching, suggest shapes. So kind of, if you decide to try this kind of thing, you know, experiment with how these things look if you want to. You know, how closely you put your circles or your lines together, how many layers of cross-hatching you do. All of these things can make a difference in representing all these details of your object. So here are basic resources, different places to go if you want to learn more about science illustration or find jobs in archaeology or in museums. And now we get to our material list. You will need, and I'm going to switch over to my camera too now. For our materials. Can everybody hear me okay?
Mal, do you want me to pin the other camera to the screen so everyone can see it?
Yes, please. And I'll stop my screen sharing. And if anyone wants me to pull any specific slide up again, we can definitely do that.
I think hopefully that sent that camera to everybody's screen.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully that works.
All right, so materials. You will need your thingy that you are drawing, your object. Ideally, a pencil with an eraser, pencil and or eraser. You want to have a straight edge, and you want to have ideally a soft measuring tape to get those smaller details in the object. As a rule of thumb, I try to have seamstress tape because it's less likely to damage a really sensitive object. And that's kind of how I've been doing. So we want to start with making our box. As a person who is not a math person whatsoever, I try to make things really simple for myself and just write down everything that I do so that I don't forget everything. And in order to get around all the ways our eyes trick us, I sometimes try to like taking measurements kind of from behind the object. And this one is, you know, very irregularly shaped. So it's probably going to come out slightly weird, but we're just practicing. And a lot of us, I know, are trying it for the first time, so it doesn't have to be perfect. All right, so lining it up with our, oh, I wish this light was a little better in front of the camera. So I'm lining it up here with the 0, and it looks to be 12 centimeters. I'm gonna call it 12 centimeters long. So I'm just gonna put that here in my notes. And then our widest point on our adorable alligator-shaped squishy stress ball is 5 centimeters wide, pretty much exactly, which is very convenient. So I'm going to put that down. And this way I know that I need a box that is at least 12 centimeters tall and 5 centimeters wide if I want to work on a life-size scale, on a 1-to-1 scale. If you're working with something small, it might be a good idea to blow it up to a 2 and kind of double it from being life-size, because it can be much simpler it can be a lot simpler to work larger if you're looking at something very small, and it helps us get a lot of detail and also just help us, maintain our intact psyches without going mad by doing lots of teeny tiny little lines and looking at very tiny things. So I am working on metric graph paper. I've got a metric ruler. If you're following along in inches, that is cool, but be warned, I will be talking in terms of metric here. So this is where we use really similar skills with, or rather really similar skills to drawing an archaeological site. When we choose what scale we want to use and what size of graph we're making, we pretty much do the same things. We have to figure out how to get all these details that we need in. Like if we would be mapping an archaeological site, we would need to make sure that we can fit 100 centimeters in here, a meter square. At least if we're looking at an excavation unit, we would need to get in tons of different details. Oh, sorry, my email went off. We need to be able to fit in tons of different details. We have to be able to put our north arrow and our scale bar. So I am going to be keeping it, making it easy on myself. And I'm going to do a 1-to-1 scale, which, okay, I'll do that over here so that y'all can kind of see what I'm doing a little bit. Sorry, I didn't realize that that was cut off the camera. So when I talk about a 1-to-1 scale, here, I'm just gonna do a quick little, oh, excuse me, nothing broke. Gonna do a quick little scale bar here. So on this, yeah, so on this paper that I have, each little centimeter is about 3 squares. So I'm making note of that in my scale bar. So each one of these wee checkers is 1 centimeter. And this whole thing is 5 centimeters across overall. It's very generous for the type of thing that I'm drawing today, but it's just a good habit to get into. So needs to go 12 centimeters up, so that's right around here, starting from our 0 point, and then 5 centimeters across, and that's right here. And this is where, our straight edge is most useful. Here we have our box, and we are able to do math goodly. Our common household object should be able to fit right in there because that is the exact size that it is. If you are working at a 2-to-1 scale, then it's not going to fit in there perfectly. It's going to be, about half the size of your box. And that is lovely and exactly what we want. So we've got our, overall box here. And I'm going to take a few more measurements it's a bit hard to tell what's going on. So I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit. Okay, turns out I can't zoom in a little bit. So I'm just gonna color these in a bit more darkly than I usually like to with a marker or a pen, just to make sure we can all see a bit better. Because I know this stuff can be pretty intimidating. Okay, we can see what's going on a little better now. Okay, here we go. Here's our larger grid. Here's our 0 point. Here's our scale bar, hopefully appearing out of the digital ether. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Let me make all this cute so we can see what in the world is going on. And then I will start taking some more of those detailed measurements of my object. And if you find yourself counting by square by square to figure out exactly how large you need your object to be, that is fine. I have done that my whole life. Of a math guy. All right. Oh, okay. Much easier to see now. Scooch this a little bit. All right, I'm gonna use a pen and do this in hard mode so we can see what's going on a bit easier. Yeah, this is just not coming out well. Let me try to change my light source a little bit. Okay, cool. That seems to work a bit better. All right, so here is our basic graph, our 0 point. Here is, for me, the 12 centimeter and 5 centimeter measurements that I need to fit my adorable little artifact inside. And here is the scale bar that I need to see how large it is. If this were a map of a if this were a map of a oh my gosh, excavation unit, it would also need a north arrow and a key. And if you're drawing something that's a composite object that's made of different materials or has different colors that you want to represent, you might want to put a key, but it's something that you can kind of come up with yourself. There's not really a rule for that. So I am going to start taking measurements of this little dude. I'm going to start measuring the snout here. That looks like it's 2 centimeters across. So I'm just gonna make a little note here in the center. All right. Got him. Okay, got those 2 points. We know how wide the snout is at its thinnest point. I might also take another measurement here to see exactly how large it flares out to be. And it looks like yeah, looks like it flares out to be 3 centimeters. So we want to, and I'm using kind of like a baseline offset situation for this. Because my object has bilateral symmetry, I'm trying to keep that in mind as I plot the points. And I'm just going to draw a little dotted line along the center so that's a bit clearer. You don't have to do this. This is just like a visualization that I think might be useful. I know a lot of students who like to simply trace their objects onto the paper. And, you know, it's not quite what we're going for, but more power to them. They've had a very clever idea. So I'm going to mark each centimeter along the sides to keep things easy for myself. So our my second point is going to be 2 centimeters down and then 3 centimeters wide. So that's going to be right about here. And I'm going to just vaguely sketch in where it seems like that's going. I'm going to take a few more quick little measurements. Oh my gosh. Ew, this one is 7 millimeters, which is gross, but this is the life that I've chosen for myself. So I'm going to make that point. And that's about how wide the tail is when it comes to a point. I'm going to take another measurement to see if there are any, notable changes in the contours of this object along its sides. It's like 4.3 centimeters. Okay. So I've got a few points to work off of now. If we want to have a super, super detailed point cloud, then we want to take tons and tons of points. Typically, I take a almost absurd amount of measurements before I get started, but we've got a limited time frame today. And we've got just about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to very quickly sketch in what I've got and then start answering questions. And sometimes it'll be a little bit surprising the size that different parts of your object will come out to be, because our eyes can be kind of tricky. And you want to make sure to take multiple measurements, kind of check your object against itself pretty often, which is why it can be helpful to take so very many reference pictures from different angles. If you want to try stippling, I hope this shows up on the camera. That basically looks something like to try and make these scoots here. Bunching all of these lines or dots together to create areas of contrast. Part of how we ID, gators is by these scoots on their back. So we want to try to get some detail in there. And, this particular species has strange googly eyes that are directly on top of its skull. So we want to be able to ID those very clearly, as well as its wee little teeth. And if we had more time, we'd want to be taking, these exact measurements of where these teeth are going to end up going, things like that. But for now, I'm just going to throw these very, very basic lines in and call it done. And I'll just kind of make it cute as I answer questions. And I will go look in the chat right about now. So here's our basic copy of our artifact. And so I'm happy to bring up slides if you have any requests for any in particular. Is it the resource slide that we want to? Okay, we already addressed that, but yeah, I can put the resource slide back up afterward. Okay, so effective methods to easily create other scales for those who are not mathematically inclined. So as far as creating other scales, there's kind of no way around it. If you, at least not that I've uncovered, if you need to blow something up, much larger than it is in real life, best thing to do is take a measurement of all those different, details, do a smaller, like life-size sketch of it first to, keep track of things for yourself. And then kind of label those parts. and then multiply those measurements. Can you see? Okay, yeah, you can kind of see. So that's kind of, if there is a better way of doing that, definitely saying out. It's just not something that I have encountered or needed to use. I've just basically kind of stuck to multiplication tables to sort of get around that part. In terms of using a caliper, you definitely can. I just personally have one in my office right now. And also because it's meant for general audiences, it's just more likely for everyday folks to have a seamstress tape than calipers. But if you get a hold of them, absolutely, those make it much more of a breeze. I definitely used those when I was working on very, very small objects, but just for an intro course like this one, seamstress tape is the best way to go. And it also depends on what, who you're working with and where you're working. I've known some people to be very, very nervous about, sharp metal calipers on delicate objects, and some people don't really care. It really all depends, but basically, if you have calipers on hand, have at it. They're wonderful tools. Ooh, any good resources for learning the rules of drawing lithics? I actually do, but I can't remember the name of that off the top of my head. I'm gonna make a note of it here, and I'll add it to, if we send out a follow-up email, I'll add it to the follow-up email, and then also see about like the description of our YouTube video.
I was going to send out the link to the YouTube video to everybody, so I can include any kind of additional resources you want to put in there too.
Oh, cool. Load up with any other resource. And more questions. What do you know about inking over your drawing, and will you come back and do an inking workshop? That is a really good question. So for inking, I typically will use, and all the publishers that I've worked with have wanted me to basically use microns on vellum. And, that's a whole other, that's basically like making it pretty. I like to kind of draw everything on a nice gridded graph paper like this, and then slap some vellum on top of it and do all my inking that way. That way I still have a pencil sketch that I can go back to, and then the publisher has something that they want, which leads into the next question. Oh, drawing closer to the camera, I can. It's a very rough one. I know we've got limited time, but here's what we got. A very rare species of alligator. Look at him go.
I'm impressed with how quickly you did that and how good it looks.
Oh, thank you. I didn't quite get his chubby little cheeks pudgy enough. That's something that you would want to go in and take a few more measurements on, but it gives you the basic idea of what kind of stuff you have to do as a artifact illustrator. And the use of digital art in scientific illustrations, I am absolutely pro that. And more people are using, especially Illustrator, to do science illustrations. This is just like the old school foundations for all that stuff. You can always update with different tools. The only real rule is that it has to be to scale. You have to be able to match it up to a size so that you can plug it into larger maps. So you can plug those larger maps into each other. And then, what else we got? Basically, like digital art good. I am just kind of old school myself. And I think it's useful to get that foundation, but it can never be a bad thing to cross-train in digital art. and then osteology drawing recourses. So the trick for that, oh, okay, we're at 5:30, but the trick for that is that a lot of osteologists I know just get a basic diagram of a human skeleton, like from an osteology handbook, and then we'll use Photoshop to just like slice little bones out and reposition them as they were seen in situ. Literally that simple. And, making sure to tweak things to be to the right scale, to be to the right size. But even for like a quick rough schematic, that's a trick that I have heard of from bioarchaeologists that they have found very, very useful. As simple as that. And
Excuse me, may I please leave now? Because I already put my name, my class, and my professor's name in there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, everybody's free to go. It is 5:31. So if you are all done, then you may skedaddle. If I think I could take one more question if anyone has any extra time. Otherwise, we're out of here.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Mel.
Thank you. I hope you had some fun.
Yeah, I'll say too, if anybody, I'll send out the email with whatever resources you've got and the link to the recording. And if anybody actually did a drawing or did one after taking this little workshop with us, if you want to send like a picture of it or a copy of it, I'd be really interested to see what comes out of this too. So please do send those along. I love seeing those. Yeah, Jane's got one there.
Yay! I would love to see them. I love seeing who's going to put me out of a job next.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Jane, that's incredible.
Cool
I'm very
figurine.
jealous you have that.
That looks really good.
Man, that's so sick. Oh, thank you for that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us for Zoom into Archaeology this week. And maybe we'll have Mal back to do an inking workshop for us sometime in the future. That would be really cool.
That's the really mind-numbing stuff.
Yeah,
that's
just lots of little dots.
If you want to do it in the very, very, very traditional way.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Mal, for such a great presentation. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.